My mom and dad were married in Michigan and divorced when I was 2. So I really don't know my parents to have had a relationship together, but they were really good co-parents. And then when I turned probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom graduated from X-ray school and we moved to Texas for work. I found myself being very alone in the beginning, especially through middle school. But we made it, and I don't think you could pay me to go back now. I graduated high school in '99, and I wanted to be a police officer. I'm not quite sure what motivated me to go down that route. I've always been kind of a square, never been a rule pusher or breaker, so it was just kind of a fit for me.
In 2002, 21-year-old Amanda Siggers is in her second year studying criminal justice at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas.
I was a young girl that had the world at my fingertips, really. I was having a decent time with my friends, exploring the city and just living life. One day, a friend and I were preparing for a test, and we chose to go to a local bookstore, coffee shop, and study. We happened to look over, and there was this guy sitting at an adjacent table. He was very handsome. After a while, conversation ensued with him.
25-year-old Cy Ghosh tells Amanda and her friend that he works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but intends to go back to school.
Cy had told me that he graduated from UT with a pre-med degree. He applied to get into Baylor College of Medicine, and he was accepted, but he denied the acceptance and ended up venturing into something else. He eventually got both of our phone numbers, and I thought for sure he was gonna call her, but he ended up calling me. And I was ecstatic. The beginning of our relationship was very fun. So I was very much a gentleman from the word go, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
He was very, very polite, very cordial, pretty much like Amanda had told me. He was a tall, handsome man, and I knew that she was, she was very smitten.
Culturally, he was very different from me. I found him to be very interesting. Even though he was raised here in the United States, he had a lot of Eastern values. His parents were first-generation Indians. I got to learn a lot about the temples and just the peaceful nature of Hinduism. It's such a beautiful culture. He told me that his father and mother were divorced, and prior to us getting together, he had moved out of his father's home and into his mother's home. He was very uncomfortable at his mother's house. She would consistently be on him, nagging him about something, mostly his career, because in that culture, career and education is number one. They generally live in the home for quite some time, even after college, in an effort to save as much money as possible. And so he was, staying in the house even at an older age because that's culturally just what was of the norm for them. Sai's mother's name is Lipika. She was very much about money, prestige. She didn't care for the union between Sai and I. He relayed that message to me, and I feel like she wanted him to marry an Indian woman and not a white woman. But we chose to look past it. 3 months later, she realized that he was serious about me because he actually brought me home, and we ended up staying the night there. And she opened up the door, and I was there. She shut the door very fast, and Sai had to go put that fire out. She was very vocal about me being a white bitch, and she didn't want that white bitch staying the night in her house. It was certainly a shock, but I knew that he wasn't going to listen to that. I knew how he felt about me, but it was very hurtful. We ended up leaving, and I don't believe I ever stayed the night there again.
Sai's dad, on the other hand, welcomes Amanda with open arms.
Sai's father, his name is Biz. I did not feel like he was racially against me or us being together. I felt like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed in life. He was just a very kind soul.
In late 2002, Biz asks his son and Amanda to come live with him and his current wife, Kay. He has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wants to spend his last days with his son.
The first few weeks were good. Kay was on board with everything. She knew that we were there to help and not to hinder. But then it started to decline. I could tell that there was tension between Kay and Cy. Cy went on to tell me that Kay would say false things about him. Eventually, it felt like I was walking on eggshells everywhere I went. One evening, Kay cornered me. She said, "You have no idea the person that you're getting involved with. You have no idea who he is, and I would highly encourage you to stay away." At the time, I thought, whatever, I'm in love, and he's so good to me, and he has nothing good to say about her, so it tainted my ability to really take her seriously.
Despite the tension, all three focus on caring for Biz. Until his death in July of 2003, Cy is inconsolable.
He was devastated. Biz was a primary force in his life, and once he passed, I think that Cy felt empty. I think he felt scared. Very different, mentally very different.
Things come to a head when Amanda finds something suspicious in Cy's car.
I found a box of condoms, and it prompted a lot of questions. He became defensive, and it led to a horrific argument, and I started to get a little bit scared. And I had attempted to make a phone call, and he ripped the phone out of the wall. So I made my way to the front door, and I pushed the panic button on the alarm, which immediately sends a call to 911. So I knew that they were on the way, and he knew they were on the way as well, and he left. So the police showed up, and I let them know what had transpired. I did not press charges. It was hours later that he came back, and I vividly remember just being so upset that he was gone, not knowing what was going to transpire, if we were breaking up.
Cy begs Amanda's forgiveness, and Amanda rationalizes that he is deeply grieving and not acting like himself.
I forgave him, and we just chose to ultimately put it behind us. I had a lot of big hopes for our relationship, and I wanted things to be normal again. So I just made it okay. And we were fine. We were fine after that.
In 2005, Amanda and Cy decide to take the next big step.
I was very happy for my daughter to get married. She was very happy about getting married.
And by this time, Cy's mom has accepted Amanda into her son's life.
So we had a Hindu ceremony at the Meenakshi temple, and 2 days later we had the Christian ceremony. My family came to the Hindu ceremony. I had to wear a red sari, red and gold. It was absolutely beautiful.
The highlight was when I saw them walking towards the limousine to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the way it was supposed to work.
I felt like my dreams were coming true. We were in forward motion.
Cy applies to medical school, and life seems on track. Until he does an about-face and pressures Amanda to change her career.
It came out of left field for sure. He was very adamant that being a police officer, that was a blue-collar job. It wasn't acceptable to him or his family, and he made it very clear that it was not where he saw his life going.
Instead, he wants her to go into healthcare as well.
I was to go through nursing school, and we were going to open and run a practice together. In theory, it was the fairy tale. I caved in because I felt like he knew better than I did. He was 5 years older than me, and he had a plan.
Cy chooses a podiatry school in Des Moines, Iowa, and Amanda gets accepted into a nearby nursing school.
When they moved to Iowa, they were about 10 hours closer to Michigan, I think, so I could see them more often. I would take the train over, help her decorate. And I love doing it. As a father, it was great for me to be able to do that.
But Amanda doesn't adapt well to her new field of study.
Well, I was in a clinical setting one day, and I ended up passing out. And that's when my professor pulled me to the side and said, you know, you may want to rethink your career choice.
She said, Dad, I really want to do it. But she knew that she couldn't do it because she couldn't stay on the side of blood, so.
Amanda decides to withdraw from the program.
When I told Cy, he didn't react well. He made it very clear that he was embarrassed by my decision. He told me he was very disappointed and that I needed to do it. I stood my ground, that I wanted to do something else. And ultimately, he had called me white trash and bitch and wished that I was dead. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake.
When Amanda Ghosh quits nursing school, her husband Cy becomes verbally abusive.
But I'm a loyal soul. I'm very loyal to my mate. And I chose to stay. I didn't think that there wasn't anything that we couldn't fix. I took my vows, my marriage vows, very seriously.
Amanda forges ahead despite Cy's disapproval.
I took all of my criminal justice and nursing courses and wrapped it into a general studies degree, basically the highest level associate degree you can get from a junior college, and I moved on. But I didn't feel proud of that accomplishment. Actually, Cy belittled me because it wasn't good enough, and so I felt like a failure.
And I felt that there was things going on that I didn't know about, which relayed into their marriage some friction.
He definitely made me feel devalued. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I missed my family.
And then, a call from out of the blue brings family directly into Amanda's life in an unexpected way.
Amber was my half-sister. She was born to my dad and my stepmom, Joyce. She was 4 years younger than me, almost to the day. The only sister I've ever had. And as she got older, she became dependent on drugs. We went our separate ways.
While struggling with addiction, 21-year-old Amber gives birth to a baby girl, Kelsey. When Kelsey is a few months old, Amber is ordered by a Michigan judge to enter rehab for 90 days.
The paternity had not been established on Kelsey. And I received a phone call from CPS asking me if I would be interested in doing a temporary foster placement for my niece. It was a no-brainer for me, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with Cy to bring her into the home, and he agreed.
In January of 2007, Amanda travels to Michigan to get her niece.
When I first saw Kelsey, she was only 11 pounds at 7 months old. I knew instantly that I was never going to give her back.
Amber was not capable of taking care of a child, but Amanda was, so I was happy that Kelsey was in a safe place.
I knew that I was on the path that God had laid out for me. She was a sickly baby due to being born addicted. She cried incessantly. It is very hard to deal with a baby that never stops crying. But somehow you figure out how to deal with it.
Amber didn't finish her rehabilitation, so the court awarded Amanda to keep taking care of Kelsey.
Even though he never said it, I think Cy felt like he had made a mistake. I think he quickly realized that the responsibility of a child was far more than he anticipated. Unfortunately, it wore Cy down over time. I was doing the laundry one day and the baby was crying. I walked around the corner and he was shaking her violently. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that he was doing what he was doing to such a tiny, fragile little baby. I was just blown away. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to leave. He has absolutely crossed the line. I need to get her out of there. He didn't deserve the title of being a dad.
In May 2007, Amanda moves back to Houston with Kelsey, leaving Cy behind in Iowa.
I was gonna take care of this baby. That was my mission. Why the career choices that I had made and why it didn't pan out. I knew that I was supposed to be Kelsey's mom. I was able to find a townhouse apartment right next door to my mom, which was extremely helpful because she was able to help me with the baby. I got a part-time job so that we could survive. Somehow we made it work. All of a sudden I became a single mom. We were divorced in December of 2008. He filed for divorce and it was uncontested. It was easy, 2-page divorce. I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me at the same time. It was such a weird feeling.
Amanda enrolls in a sonography program for training in ultrasound.
I felt very confident. I found my independence. I was going to school and I was working full-time. Kelsey was going to daycare and thriving in daycare. We were happy. I was free of all of the dysfunction that I had lived in for so long.
But Amanda's newfound peace will not last for long.
So I moved back to Texas in December of 2009, early 2010. And that's when the stalking began.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved. This behavior can't go on forever. When is somebody gonna break?
Amanda Harris has moved on with her life, while Cy flounders.
Ironically enough, he decided that medical school wasn't quite right for him.
Cy drops out of podiatry, converts to Christianity, and returns to Houston.
One day he called me and told me that he had obtained a job at a pizza place near my apartment. And I thought, why in the world would he take a job delivering pizzas? And then it dawned on me that he could drive in and out of my apartment complex on the daily, on the hourly sometimes. I found it to be bizarre behavior.
He's a pizza delivery driver, where being a law enforcement officer wasn't good enough for her. Now he's going to drive and deliver pizzas, not because he wants to, but because it allows him to have the freedom to drive by and check on her whenever he wants to.
In early 2011, 2.5 years after her divorce, Amanda moves to a new home in a new neighborhood and doesn't share her address with Cy. It's a new beginning.
I was encouraged by my friends to get out there, so I put my profile up on an online dating site and I met Wayne.
Wayne Harris works in the motorsports industry and, like Amanda, is divorced with one child, a boy named Nick.
So I met up with him and he thought he was an attractive man and our conversations just flowed so well. I just knew right away. I was so ecstatic to feel this feeling again, to know that I was capable of feeling, the joy, the butterflies again. And he was as well, that we just didn't miss a beat. We decided that we were gonna see each other the very next day, which turned into the very next day and every day thereafter, unless he was out of town for work.
And I thought he's just a fantastic guy. Real nice to be around, very energetic.
So Super Bowl Sunday rolled around and Wayne came over that evening and I was cooking and I would oftentimes let Kelsey play at the park right there because I could see her. She's basically within arm's reach of me. So Kelsey's playing, Wayne and I are talking, and I get a knock at the door, and it's the police officer that lives on site. He had received a call from a concerned person letting them know that I let my child play outside unattended.
Amanda invites the officer inside to discuss it, embarrassed that her new boyfriend is a witness.
We all had conversation. Wayne had conversation with him. We were all in agreement that She was certainly within an eye shot, ear shot, arm shot of me, and that she was perfectly fine. I asked the officer who had made the call, and he couldn't tell me, but I knew in my gut who was at the root of this. I felt frustrated. I felt violated again. It's a very uneasy feeling to know you're being watched. At this point, my relationship is blossoming with Wayne, and I didn't let him know everything that was going on because I certainly didn't want to taint a good relationship with my baggage and drama. I didn't want to bring that into the relationship.
Amanda's strategy is to block Cy completely.
I figured he didn't get his way. Hopefully he'll move on now, but that never happened. And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
It has been 5 years since Amanda took custody of Kelsey. Now, as Amanda is on the verge of becoming Kelsey's legal mother, Cy starts to stir things up.
What he did is he cleverly went to a therapist, told the therapist all of his grievance toward me, and made me out to look like a neglectful mother. And it was her duty to call CPS by state law. I received a phone call from CPS that they were going to interview my daughter that day. I felt mortified, and as soon as she stepped foot in my door, she realized quickly that Kelsey was just fine.
I just couldn't believe that he did that. It was like, when does it stop?
Kelsey, the adopted daughter, is the reason she left him in the first place. So by calling CPS, if that worker had not done a thorough and proper investigation or had just rushed to judgment, then Amanda could have very easily lost Kelsey. And for all intents and purposes, her niece, who is now her daughter, is the most important thing she has. And it would have been devastating.
Concerned that Cy's unpredictable behavior is escalating, Amanda seeks help from the local police.
I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I honestly have no idea how to deal with it. I've gone to the police department at this point. I've talked to officers that have asked me to just ignore it, and as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, there's really nothing they can do. It's very frustrating. I felt horribly harassed, unprotected, and you feel so helpless.
Wayne steps up and asks Amanda and Kelsey to move in with him on the other side of Houston.
It was the best feeling. I felt Kelsey was going to have a great role model, a great father figure. Moving to the north side of town was good because I didn't know where I had gone. And so the stalking had come to a halt for a short period of time. Life was actually going really, really well.
It was very comforting to know that she was with somebody that was safe, and Kelsey too.
That all changes one night when Wayne is away on business.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window. I knew he was out there.
In 2012, in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Amanda Ghosh is awakened by gunshots outside her window.
I immediately called the police.
She did not see Cy shoot the gun, but she did see him get in the car. When that happened, well, that's when I really became concerned.
When they showed up, he wasn't there. They checked the perimeter of the home. They didn't find any shell casings. They spoke with the neighbors. None of the neighbors had heard any gunshots, and so I kind of felt like they didn't believe me, and it really went nowhere.
Amanda is on high alert, and it's not long before another incident occurs.
One night, Wayne and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and our dog ran to the window and was barking his tail off. So I knew somebody was out there, and I had a feeling that it was Cy. Wayne hopped up quite angrily, and I encouraged him to just settle down for half a second, let me call the police and get them there this time so that they could witness what was going on. They were right around the corner, so it only took a couple of minutes, and they caught him there. Thank God. This time he had finally been caught, and they issued him a trespass violation and a warning. We actually felt good after that for a while. We didn't see him for quite some time after that.
With Cy in her rear view, Amanda commits to her bright future.
We decided to get married on 12/12/12 at 12/12 at the Justice of the Peace.
They were very, very happy. And in fact, at the time that they got married, they adopted Kelsey at the same time.
I had been fighting for custody of Kelsey for the better part of 7 years. It was quite the process, but we'd finally gotten there. And then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant for Gemma.
It was great to see. Wayne wrote notes for the unborn baby for her to read later on and, when she grows up. So he was very, very excited about being a new father.
Gemma was born with a very, very rare condition called bacterial association. She was born with only one kidney, as well as no esophagus, a cardiac defect, and a vertebral defect. Needless to say, she required 24/7 attention, care.
She was a perfect little child. Of course, all of my grandkids were perfect. They are a blessing.
About a year and a half after Gemma was born, we moved into this beautiful home that neither one of us thought we would ever be able to live in. And here we achieved it. We were on top of the world at this point. Christmas Day, 2015, we woke up rather early with the kiddos because they were just super excited. And we just sat down to open our gifts, and I hear a tap at the door. And who else but Cy?
Cy tells Amanda that he would like to pray with her and her 2 daughters.
I just couldn't believe that he even came back around, especially at a time when the family's getting together for Christmas.
Wayne came unglued that day. He escorted Cy off of our property with a lot of profanity and a lot of anger and aggression.
Cy's stalking has been going on for almost 6 years, ever since Amanda decided to leave him.
There are some individuals who cannot take no for an answer. They cannot move on and regain their sense of balance until they're back in control again. Maybe if Amanda were to run back to him and he could say, "No, I don't want you," then he would have control again and he could move on. Right now, none of the decisions are his, except the ones that he uses to torture and drive them crazy.
She is aware of Texas's strong stand your ground laws and asks the police for more information about self-defense.
So I asked the officer what my rights were. If I had the right to hold him at citizen's arrest until the police got there. He told me that we definitely had that right.
Wayne owns a gun and suggests Amanda buy one too.
Wayne encouraged me to go get my license to carry and buy a weapon to protect myself due to all of this incessant harassment, stalking. So I took a few classes and tried to become as capable with my weapon as possible. June 28th, 2017 was Kelsey's 11th birthday, and she chose to just have a she day. She chose to do all kinds of things like get her nails done, get her hair done, very girly stuff.
Amanda, Kelsey, and Kelsey's friend Georgia meet up with Wayne, his son Nick, and baby Gemma at Kelsey's favorite restaurant.
And after dinner, Gemma was exhausted, so I asked Wayne to take her back home so that I could finish shopping with Kelsey and her friend for her birthday. So he obliged and reached over and gave me a kiss, a really long kiss. The kids were in the background ewing. I'll forever remember it. I stayed at the mall with Georgia and Kelsey for probably about another hour. Kelsey asked me if her friend could stay the night, and I said sure. So all three of us went back to our home. And as I was rounding the corner of my street, I saw Cy on his hands and knees at my front door with Wayne pointing a gun at him. I knew immediately that I needed to protect my family. I reached into my glove box, I grabbed my gun, and I told the girls to sit down and not to move. I got out of the car, I held the gun in that direction, and I called the police.
Hi, I need a police officer as soon as possible. I'm making
Hold on.
arrest right now.
You can't make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, I've already been informed that I can. I have an ongoing case against this person.
Ma'am.
Get down! Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
On June 28, 2017, Jennifer Provoznik is visiting friends who live down the street from where Amanda and Wayne live.
I work in law enforcement, and it's my day off, so I just wanted to really enjoy my day with my friends.
They are oblivious to the scene unfolding a couple of yards away.
My name is Amanda Harris. I've been down there many times to tell you guys what's going on. He's been told by the police to stay away hundreds of times.
Do you have a weapon right now?
My husband and I both have a weapon.
Okay, I'm going to need you to put that weapon up, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, you and your husband both.
Wayne, he wants you to put your weapon down.
Does this other male have a weapon?
I have no idea.
From inside the car, 11-year-old Kelsey also calls 911.
Send him over right now, please.
What's going on?
My mom's ex-husband, he literally stalks us and he's at our house right now. My parents are yelling at him right now. It's done. I'm sorry. I'm just really scared.
I'm getting hurt. You stay on the
And I hear 3 distinct gunshots and a woman screaming. So at this time, my training kicks in, and I told my friend, I was like, listen, call 911. I'm going down there.
I had been shot, but I didn't know it. It was all so surreal. I saw my husband fall to the ground out of the corner of my eye. And as I sat up from the position I was in, I was shot again. And I was laying between the 2 cars when I saw Cy's feet moving around the car and circle back to me. And when I looked up, he was holding a gun at my head, and he pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. I had been saved by the grace of God. It didn't fire. And some divine force picked me up, and I got to my feet and I ran for my life.
I see a woman running into the house and slamming the door. And then there's this guy just standing there in between 2 cars, looking around, and he looks right at me and then takes off running.
Cy Ghosh gets in a car and flees the scene.
And that's when a little girl gets out of the car. She looks at me and she starts screaming, "Save my daddy." And I look down, there's a body in the driveway. And I was like, listen, there's a woman behind me. You take your friend. You do not stop till you get to her. Do you understand me? And she goes, yes. And so I sent her off at that point. I look at the individual on the ground, and I know there was no point of me even attempting CPR or any other life-saving matters.
All I could think is he's gonna fire through this door. And I realized in that moment that I had left Kelsey in the back seat of the car. I ran back out the front door, and I was met by a very kind lady.
I know that she's wounded and she's also in shock. She's yelling about her babies being missing. She's also screaming, I knew he would do something like this. I knew it. And then she notices the man in the driveway.
She kindly grabbed me by my arm. That's when I realized I'd been shot in my arm. And she walked me over to his body. And I was able to say goodbye to my husband. And they were putting me in an ambulance shortly thereafter.
When police arrive, they find 5-year-old Gemma and 17-year-old Nick hiding in a closet. That's when Amanda's father drops by on his way home to say happy birthday to Kelsey.
As I got out of the car, there was 3 or 4 policemen that came up to me. And the first thing they said was, Amanda's in the hospital, but she's okay. She's been shot, but she's going to be okay. And right at that point, that's when my heart just fell. And the first thing I thought of was the kids. Are the kids okay? What happened? And they said, yeah, the kids are here. They're with some of the neighbors that are here. And then I said, well, what about Wayne? That's when they continued to tell me he didn't make it.
We begin with that breaking news alert out of League City. A man police initially wanted for questioning is now wanted for murder.
We were the first news crew on the scene. We're getting there, and it's the chaos of the scene because you have a gunman on the run, you have dead body and someone seriously wounded, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
They put the hospital on lockdown because Cy was on the run.
I was, at her bedside the whole time. I don't know, it's like a movie, a bad movie. It was a horrible nightmare.
So as this statewide manhunt is going on, police had reason to believe that Cy was going to try to run for the border. And it was a checkpoint in El Paso. They were able to identify that Cy was trying to cross. There wasn't much of a resistance. At that point, even Cy had figured out that this was over and he was going to be taken into custody. When they look inside the vehicle, they do find a gun. They find several clips with bullets inside where the casings match the 12 that were found on scene of the shooting back in Lake City.
I don't know how I made it through. I really don't. But I have children, and they needed me, and life didn't stop. I had to get out of bed every day. I had to accept that he was never coming back. Thank God for my children. I stayed in the house until the trial came, and it took us 2 years to go to trial.
As the family tries to heal, Amanda assumes the only time she will ever have to encounter Cy again is in court. But she is wrong.
Well, one day I get this phone call, and I can clearly see that it's the jail on my caller ID. So I turn on the voice recorder, and I took the phone call.
Hello?
Hello?
I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. I'm really sorry.
Is this a joke?
No, I just want to apologize.
You almost killed me. Is this a joke?
No, Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got scared.
Got scared?
I could not believe that I was listening to this person on the other end of the phone. How is this even allowed? Who is running this jail and allowing a murderer to call his victim?
I just want to pray with you guys. I'll put you on the phone real quick before we go to trial. Can I pray with you? Please, Jesus, please comfort Amanda. Please help me never harm her, never to cause her problems again.
Cy's staggering ability to keep harassing Amanda will even continue through the trial itself.
So I was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and stalking.
In the middle of the case, Cy fires his defense attorney and decides he's going to defend himself now.
But I know that he wanted to get me on the stand and question me, and that was his way of doing it. He was able to question me for a very long period of time.
Cy thought that Amanda was going to wilt on the stand. That's not what happened.
Amanda comes through this a hero. The fact that she does not cave, that she looks him straight in the eye and answers his questions. So if he wanted control, he didn't get it. He got to talk to her, but he didn't get the responses, the feeling, the control that he was seeking. So in that case, Amanda comes out a winner.
I don't know how the law allows your attacker to question you. How is that even possible? But it happened.
After the trial wraps up, the jury is quick to return guilty verdicts. And on March 5th, 2020, Sai is sentenced to 50 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years.
I was disappointed because I feel like he should have gotten life without the possibility of parole. I truly believe that if he were to walk the streets again, if he were to ever get out, that he will kill me. He will finish the job.
I hope he never gets out, and all I can do is just say, let Jesus take the wheel. Even though I'm that close to her, I can't imagine going through what she went through. But we get through it every day. It's a process where we're all working through it.
I was angry with the police. I feel like they failed my family, and I think Sai Ghosh is pure evil. But there's still a big life to live, and I choose to just be happy. We have what, 40? I have 40 summers left. I'm gonna make the best of the 40 summers I have left. Wayne wouldn't want me to waste them.
It begins with a sound no one remembers clearly anymore. A sound swallowed by the city before anyone realized it mattered. The echo of footsteps on wet pavement, the distant hum of traffic sliding through the streets of Berlin at dawn, and somewhere inside that ordinary noise, a moment that would never be ordinary again, because this was the last morning anyone saw her alive, and at the time, no one knew they were witnessing the opening line of a cold case that would haunt the city for decades. Berlin, early spring 2001, a city still stitching itself together, east and west learning how to breathe the same air, construction cranes cutting the skyline like scars that refused to fade, neighborhoods full of optimism layered over old fears, and in one of those neighborhoods, quiet, residential, the kind of place people trust without thinking, a woman leaves her apartment and vanishes without a trace, no scream, no struggle, no witnesses stepping forward, just absence, sudden and total. The kind that feels unreal until it doesn't. Her name appears briefly in police logs, then on a missing persons notice taped to a bus stop, then in a local paper, a small photo, black and white, eyes caught mid-blink, a smile that looks almost apologetic, and for a few days the city pays attention, neighbors talk, co-workers replay the last conversations, family members insist something is wrong. This is not like her, she would never just disappear. But Berlin is large and restless and attention moves fast. And soon the headlines shrink, the articles stop, and what remains is a growing silence filled with questions no one can answer. The apartment tells its own quiet story, keys still on the table, dishes in the sink, a coat missing from the hook by the door, nothing broken, nothing forced, no signs of panic, the kind of scene investigators hate most because it offers no direction. No obvious violence, no clear timeline, just a normal life paused mid-sentence, as if someone pressed stop and walked away. Detectives move through the room slowly, cataloging details that feel too ordinary to matter. A calendar with appointments circled, a voicemail message left unanswered, a bed slept in but not returned to, and outside, the street looks exactly the same as it did the day before. Cars parked neatly, trees standing still, neighbors walking dogs, the banality of it all pressing down harder than chaos ever could. They canvass the area, knock on doors, ask the same questions over and over. Did you see anything, hear anything, anyone unusual, a car, a man, a sound in the night? But the answers blur together into a chorus of no's and maybes and shrugs, memory already slipping, already unreliable, already rewriting itself, and within days the investigation hits its first wall, smooth and unyielding. Phone records are checked, bank accounts reviewed, travel possibilities considered, every angle explored. And yet nothing points forward, no sudden withdrawals, no packed bags, no goodbye notes, no history of running, no secret life waiting to be uncovered, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the language changes, the urgency softens, the case is no longer an emergency, it becomes an investigation, then an open file, then a phrase no family ever wants to hear spoken aloud. Cold case. The community feels it too, the shift from hope to unease, from expectation to dread. Because disappearances leave a different kind of wound, one that never closes, one that keeps asking questions long after the voices asking them have gone quiet, and every year on the anniversary, the same faces appear again, holding photos that grow more faded with time, standing in the same streets, repeating the same plea, someone must know something, someone saw something, someone is out there with the truth. Years pass and Berlin changes, buildings rise and fall, neighborhoods transform, people move on, But the case stays frozen, sealed in folders and evidence bags labeled archived, revisited occasionally when a new detective takes a look, when a new technology promises answers, when a tip comes in from someone remembering too late or misremembering too much, and each time hope flickers then dies again. Rumors take root where facts are missing, whispered theories pass between neighbors, arguments over whether she left willingly or met with violence, whether someone close knew more than they admitted, whether the truth was hiding in plain sight all along, and the absence becomes a presence, a shadow that lingers over conversations, over streets, over the idea of safety itself. Inside police headquarters, the file grows thicker but no clearer, pages filled with interviews, maps marked and remarked, timelines adjusted as new information contradicts the old. And still there is no body, no crime scene, no definitive proof that a crime even occurred. Just a person who vanished and a city that couldn't explain why. Detectives retire, new ones take their place, technology advances, DNA databases expand, surveillance cameras multiply. But the case remains stubbornly silent, immune to progress, resistant to logic, a reminder that some mysteries do not yield easily, and some refuse to yield at all. And then years later, long after most people have stopped expecting answers, after the case has been discussed in training seminars as an example of investigative dead ends, after the family has learned to live with uncertainty as a permanent condition, something shifts, quietly at first, a review, a re-examination, a detail that once seemed insignificant now viewed through a different lens, a connection that only becomes visible with time. No press release announces it, no headlines scream yet, just a small movement inside the system. A file pulled from storage, a name reconsidered, a question asked again, and in that moment the cold case stirs, not solved, not yet, but awake, breathing again after years of dormancy. As Berlin stands on the edge of a revelation it does not see coming. The city sleeps, unaware that the past is about to step forward, that a mystery buried under 2 decades of silence is preparing to speak, and that when it does, the sound will be loud enough to shock an entire community that thought this story had already ended. The file opens with a sound that only exists in memory now, the dry scrape of cardboard against metal as a box is pulled from an archive shelf, dust lifting into the air like something disturbed that had been sleeping too long, and inside that box, a life reduced to paper, photographs, transcripts, maps, all of it carrying the weight of a question that never stopped asking itself what really happened on that morning in 2001 when Berlin lost one of its own. The detective assigned to the review doesn't expect miracles, no one ever does with a cold case, but there is a discipline to looking again, a belief that time changes not just memories but meaning, that what once seemed ordinary can become suspicious when placed beside everything that followed. And so the process begins again, line by line, interview by interview, as if the past might finally flinch under sustained pressure. The first thing that stands out is how quickly normality turned into uncertainty, how within hours the absence was noted but not feared, how neighbors assumed errands, co-workers assumed delays, family assumed misunderstanding, and how that gap between last sighting and first alarm widened just enough to swallow critical minutes, then hours, then days. The kind of gap that allows a person to disappear completely without leaving a single clean edge behind. There is a witness statement buried deep in the file, one that never made headlines, never shaped the narrative, a neighbor who thought they heard a car door slam unusually late that night, not loud enough to wake them fully, not strange enough to investigate, just a momentary interruption in sleep, recorded, filed, forgotten until now when it sits differently, heavier, asking whether the city itself may have heard the truth and rolled over. Street maps are unfolded on the table, creased from earlier examinations, routes traced in pen and pencil, circles marking where she lived, where she worked, where she was last confirmed to be seen, the geography of a life laid out like a puzzle missing its centerpiece, and as the detective studies the lines, a realization creeps in slowly, unsettling in its simplicity, that every theory assumed movement away from the area, escape routes, highways, trains, borders, when perhaps the answer never traveled far at all. The city in 2001 was less watched than it is now, fewer cameras, fewer digital footprints, a place where anonymity was still possible, especially in transitional neighborhoods where residents came and went without drawing attention, and within that environment, someone could exist in the margins, seen but unrecognized, remembered but unnamed, the perfect camouflage for something terrible. Interviews are replayed in the detective's mind, the language used by those closest to her, phrases like "she wouldn't do that," "there was no reason," "nothing seemed wrong." All statements that reflect certainty but also blindness, because the truth rarely announces itself in advance, and the people who carry it often look exactly like everyone else. One interview in particular begins to vibrate with new tension. A man questioned early in the investigation, someone connected but not central, cooperative but forgettable, his answers polite, his timeline clean, too clean perhaps, but at the time there was nothing to challenge it, no contradiction, no evidence, and so he faded into the background, another name among many, until now, when a small inconsistency emerges, a discrepancy in dates that once seemed trivial but now aligns with something else entirely. Records from different agencies are cross-checked, something that wasn't easily done 2 decades earlier. Systems that once operated in isolation now speak to each other fluently, and in that conversation between databases, a pattern begins to form, faint but unmistakable, movements that don't match statements, locations that overlap too precisely to be coincidence, and suddenly the case is no longer quiet. The detective feels it then, that shift that every investigator recognizes instantly, the moment when a cold case warms, when the air in the room feels different, when the past stops being static and starts to move, and with that movement comes caution, because hope can be dangerous, especially after so many years of disappointment. Another detail surfaces, one that once seemed irrelevant, a purchase made days before the disappearance, nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, but unnecessary, out of character, something that might suggest planning or fear or perhaps coercion, and when placed alongside the newly identified inconsistencies, it stops being random and starts looking intentional. The file no longer reads like a tragedy without a villain. It begins to resemble something more precise, more personal, a story not of disappearance but of erasure, and the question shifts from where did she go to who made sure she never came back. Outside the office, Berlin continues as it always has, unaware that its old secrets are being lifted into the light, unaware that the streets it walks every day may be tied to a moment of violence that was never acknowledged, never marked, never resolved, and yet carried forward in silence. The detective consults with colleagues, cautiously at first, then with growing urgency, because the connections are fragile, circumstantial but compelling, and they point in a direction no one expected, back toward someone who never left, someone who blended into the city so completely that even suspicion forgot them. A decision is made to escalate, to reopen lines of inquiry that have been dormant for years, to contact witnesses who assumed they would never be called again, to knock on doors that have already been knocked on, to ask questions that sound familiar but land differently now, weighted by time and context. Some doors open reluctantly, others eagerly, people relieved to finally speak again, to unload thoughts they've carried quietly for decades, memories sharpened by guilt or softened by distance, and among them, a recurring observation emerges, subtle but consistent, about a presence, a figure who seemed to orbit her life without being fully part of it, someone whose interest felt excessive in hindsight. The city begins to murmur, just slightly, as word spreads through unofficial channels that the old case is moving again, that detectives are asking questions, that something is happening, and with that murmur comes unease, because unresolved stories have a way of unsettling even those who are not directly involved. In a small office, the detective stares at a photograph taken in 2001, one of the last images of her, studying the background, the expressions of people around her, wondering what details were overlooked, what was normalized because it was familiar, what danger wore the disguise of routine. The realization settles slowly but firmly, that the truth was never missing, only misread, scattered across years and files and fading memories, waiting for the right moment, the right perspective, the right convergence of technology and persistence to pull it together. And somewhere in Berlin, a man goes about his day unaware that the life he has built since 2001 is beginning to crack, that the silence he relied on is thinning, that the cold case he believed buried is now watching him back, closer than ever, as the city edges toward a reckoning it cannot avoid. The detective closes the file for the night, not because the work is done, but because the next step requires patience, precision, and timing, and as the lights dim in the office, one truth is already clear. This is no longer a mystery fading into history. This is a story accelerating toward impact, and when it breaks, it will break loudly. The past has been invited back into the room, and it is no longer willing to wait. Morning light creeps across Berlin like it always has, indifferent, routine, spilling into kitchens and offices and tram windows, while somewhere beneath that ordinary glow, a pressure builds, unseen, unheard, as the reopened cold case begins to move with intent, no longer drifting, no longer speculative, now following a line that tightens with every hour. The first call goes out before most of the city is fully awake. A former witness reached after years of silence, their voice older, roughened by time, surprise flickering briefly before being replaced by something closer to relief, as if they had been waiting for this moment without admitting it even to themselves. They say they always wondered if someone would come back, if the questions would return, if the thing they noticed but dismissed might finally matter. The conversation is careful, methodical, but beneath it runs an undercurrent of urgency, because memory is fragile and time has a way of rearranging facts. And yet some impressions do not fade, they simply settle, waiting for permission to surface. The witness hesitates, then describes a man seen nearby more than once in the weeks before the disappearance, never threatening, never overtly suspicious, just present, watching, lingering in places where he didn't quite belong. At the time it meant nothing. Berlin was full of strangers, especially then, especially in neighborhoods still in flux, but now when the name is mentioned something clicks, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty that sends a chill through the room. It's the same name that has been circling the file, the same one connected to inconsistencies, the same one that never quite disappeared from the margins of the investigation. Another call follows, then another, each one pulling at a thread that tightens into something unmistakable. A pattern emerging not from a single revelation but from accumulation, small details aligning across years, across perspectives, across memories that once felt too weak to trust. A neighbor recalls a brief argument overheard through a wall, voices muffled but tense, the kind of sound people choose not to investigate because it feels safer to assume it's nothing. A coworker remembers a sudden change in routine, a look of distraction, an uncharacteristic silence in the days leading up to the disappearance, dismissed at the time as stress, now reframed as something else entirely. A friend recalls a comment made in passing, a joke that wasn't quite a joke, about someone who wouldn't take no for an answer, brushed aside because it felt impolite to probe deeper. Each recollection lands softly, but together they form weight, and the case shifts again, no longer defined by absence alone but by proximity, by a figure who was close enough to blend in, close enough to be trusted, close enough to avoid scrutiny simply by being familiar. The detective builds a timeline anew, not erasing the old one but layering over it, adjusting, annotating, watching as gaps close and contradictions sharpen. The suspect's movements are mapped against hers, not as isolated events but as overlapping paths, converging again and again until coincidence becomes implausible. There is a moment, quiet but decisive, when the detective realizes that the original investigation didn't fail because of negligence or indifference, but because it was trapped in the assumptions of its time, limited by what could be seen, recorded, connected. The truth wasn't hidden particularly well. It was simply scattered, waiting for the tools and patience that only years could provide. Surveillance footage from unrelated cases is revisited, not because anyone expects to see the crime itself, but because modern analysis can extract patterns invisible to the naked eye. Faces are scanned, movements tracked, fragments compared, and while nothing definitive appears, the absence itself becomes telling, a deliberate avoidance of cameras in areas where they were sparse but not non-existent, suggesting awareness, intention, planning. Financial records are examined with fresh eyes, not just looking for dramatic transactions but subtle shifts, changes in spending habits, unexplained stability where instability would be expected, a life that continued smoothly when it should have shown cracks. The suspect's history reveals no obvious violence, no criminal record that would have raised alarms, just an ordinary existence, steady, unremarkable, the most effective disguise of all. And yet, beneath that surface, inconsistencies multiply, timelines that don't quite align, explanations that sound reasonable until placed beside each other, then begin to fray. The detective notes how often the suspect positions himself as helpful, cooperative, eager to assist, a posture that reads differently now, not as innocence but as control. As the days pass, the reopened investigation begins to ripple outward, touching institutions that have changed names, merged, evolved, each interaction reminding everyone involved how much time has passed and how little has truly been resolved. Files are requested, permissions granted, old evidence retrieved from storage, the physical remnants of a life interrupted handled with gloves and reverence. One item, overlooked before because it seemed too common to matter, is sent for modern analysis, not with great expectation, but with the quiet understanding that technology sees what humans miss. The results do not arrive immediately, But the waiting itself feels charged because the narrative is already shifting, already pointing toward confrontation. The detective prepares carefully, knowing that decades of silence can harden into certainty, that someone who has lived unchallenged for so long will not crumble easily. Strategy becomes as important as evidence, timing as critical as truth, because this is no longer about discovery alone, it is about accountability. When the suspect is contacted again, the tone is different, subtle but unmistakable, questions framed with precision, pauses left intentionally open, the conversation guided not toward confession but toward contradiction. The suspect remains calm, polite, even amused, responding with confidence born of years without consequence, but small cracks appear, hesitations where there were none before, details repeated too precisely as if rehearsed. The detective senses it then, that familiar tightening in the chest, the awareness that the room holds more than it says, that beneath the surface calm something is shifting, recalculating, realizing that the ground is no longer stable. This is the moment cold cases live for, when the past finally recognizes the present as a threat. Outside, the city begins to sense change, not through official announcements but through movement. Unmarked cars parked longer than usual, officers returning to streets they haven't visited in years, questions whispered, speculation stirring, because communities remember even when they pretend not to, and unresolved stories leave fingerprints everywhere. Media interest flickers cautiously, a few inquiries made, quickly deflected, because this stage of an investigation thrives on silence, on surprise, on letting the truth build its momentum unseen. But rumors slip through cracks, they always do, and the phrase cold case reopened starts to circulate again, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. The family is informed, gently, carefully, not promised resolution but offered honesty, the acknowledgement that something is happening, that the case they were told to mourn without answers is moving again. Their reaction is not joy, not relief, but something more complex, a cautious awakening of hope layered with fear, because reopening old wounds risks reopening pain they learned to survive. As night falls, the detective reviews everything once more, every note, every connection, every unanswered question, not looking for perfection but for readiness. Because the next step will not be reversible, and the consequences will extend far beyond the office walls, into lives reshaped by a truth delayed but not denied. Somewhere in the city, the suspect senses the shift, perhaps without knowing why, perhaps feeling it as unease, as the subtle realization that the silence he depended on is thinning, that the city he blended into so successfully is beginning to look back at him differently. The cold case, once dormant, now pulses with intent, drawing closer to a moment that will redefine it forever, not as an unsolved mystery, but as a reckoning long overdue. And as Berlin settles into the familiar rhythm of night, unaware of how close it is to a revelation decades in the making, the investigation crosses an invisible line, from inquiry to action, from possibility to inevitability, setting the stage for a confrontation that will finally force the past to speak. The night does not bring rest, not to the investigation, not to the city, not to the people who have unknowingly carried this story with them for more than 2 decades, because once a cold case reaches this temperature, sleep becomes impossible, replaced by calculation, anticipation, and the quiet hum of something irreversible drawing nearer. In a small room lit by screens and desk lamps, the detective watches time compress, years folding inward as if the distance between 2001 and now were finally collapsing under its own weight. Notes are rearranged, timelines aligned one last time. Not to find new truths but to confirm that the truths already uncovered can withstand scrutiny, that they are strong enough to step into the open without breaking. The suspect's life since the disappearance reads like a study in quiet persistence, no dramatic turns, no sudden flights, just stability, employment, relationships formed and dissolved, addresses changed but always within the same city, the same orbit, as if Berlin itself were an anchor. It's a pattern that once suggested innocence, the logic being that guilt flees, guilt hides, guilt runs, but time teaches investigators otherwise, that sometimes guilt stays exactly where it is, counting on the world to move on. Old acquaintances are contacted discreetly, people who knew him then and know him now, and their responses reveal an unsettling consistency, descriptions that mirror each other across decades, controlled, polite, private, someone who keeps things compartmentalized, emotions measured, boundaries firm. Not violent, not volatile, just unreadable, the kind of person who leaves little behind even when you think you know them. One former colleague hesitates before speaking, voice dropping instinctively, describing an incident long dismissed as workplace tension, an argument that felt too intense for its context, anger surfacing and disappearing just as quickly, leaving behind an unease that couldn't be explained. At the time it was chalked up to stress, ambition, personality, but now it fits into a broader silhouette, sharpens an outline that has been forming steadily. The detective notes how often anger is remembered in hindsight, how rarely it announces itself in advance, and how many violent acts are preceded not by rage but by restraint, by someone who learns to compress their impulses until release becomes inevitable. Evidence long thought inert is re-examined, fibers, fragments, items stored carefully but without hope, because science had not yet caught up to suspicion back then. Now, under modern analysis, those same fragments speak differently, not loudly, not conclusively, but suggestively, narrowing the field, tightening the focus, turning probability into direction. There is no dramatic revelation yet, no single piece that explodes into certainty, just convergence, everything leaning the same way, every independent line of inquiry pointing toward the same conclusion, until denial becomes the least reasonable option left. The decision to act is made not in a burst of excitement but in silence, the kind that settles over a room when everyone understands the weight of what comes next. This will not be a conversation, not an interview, not a friendly check-in. This will be a confrontation, measured, controlled, precise, because surprises favor those who prepare. Surveillance begins quietly, unmarked cars blending into traffic, routines observed, patterns confirmed, not because the suspect is expected to flee, but because certainty demands observation, and observation reveals things interviews never will. The suspect moves through his days predictably, work, errands, social interactions that look normal from the outside, and that normality itself becomes unsettling, because it suggests confidence, the belief that the past has lost its power. Officers note how he checks his surroundings, not anxiously but attentively, a habit formed over years, a way of maintaining awareness without appearing paranoid. It's subtle, but to trained eyes, it signals someone who expects scrutiny, even if he doesn't know why it's coming. The detective imagines the moment of contact, how it will unfold, where it will happen, how the words will be chosen, because language matters, tone matters, timing matters, especially when confronting someone who has lived comfortably inside their own narrative for so long. The family is informed again, this time with firmer language, still cautious, but no longer abstract. Something is imminent. The reaction is quiet, heavy, the kind of silence that absorbs hope and fear in equal measure, because after 22 years, certainty feels almost more frightening than doubt. Outside, Berlin carries on, cafes open, trains run, conversations flow, and beneath it all, the city unknowingly prepares to witness the resurfacing of a story it once allowed to sink, a reminder that time does not erase truth, it only delays its arrival. As dawn approaches, the detective reviews the plan once more, not searching for reassurance but for resolve, because this is the threshold moment, the point of no return where investigation becomes action, where the cold case steps fully into the present. The suspect leaves his residence at a familiar hour, unaware that today will not follow the same script as the countless days before it. He walks with the ease of routine, the confidence of someone who believes the worst is behind him, that whatever happened in 2001 has stayed where it belongs, buried in a time no one visits anymore. The unmarked vehicle follows at a distance, then another, the choreography smooth, invisible to everyone except those who know what to look for. Communication remains minimal, efficient, each message stripped to essentials, because now is not the time for speculation, only execution. The detective watches from a vantage point that offers clarity without exposure, heart steady, mind focused, aware that this moment has been building since before they were assigned the case, since before technology caught up, since before the city was ready to look again. And then, without warning, the past reaches forward, not with drama, not with noise, but with inevitability, as officers step into position and the machinery of accountability begins to turn. The cold case is no longer an abstract file, no longer a question waiting for answers, it is a living thing again, demanding resolution, and Berlin, whether it realizes it or not, is about to hear its voice. The moment arrives without ceremony, no sirens, no shouted commands echoing through the street, just the quiet synchronization of movement as officers close the distance and the world narrows to a few controlled steps, a few measured words, a hand raised not in panic but in signal, and the past finally stands face to face with the present. He looks up, surprised but not startled, as if interruption is unexpected but not unimaginable, his expression settling into something neutral, practiced, the reflex of someone who has learned how to receive attention without revealing what it stirs inside. The detective steps forward, voice calm, formal, the language precise, identifying authority, stating purpose, not accusing, not explaining, simply informing, because at this stage clarity is power. For a brief second, the city seems to hold its breath, traffic continuing just beyond the frame, pedestrians passing unaware, lives intersecting with history without realizing it, and then the words land, unmistakable, unavoidable, the name spoken aloud again in connection with a morning long buried, and the suspect's posture changes, not dramatically, just enough to register, shoulders tightening, eyes focusing too sharply, the mask adjusting. There is no resistance, no outburst, no denial shouted into the open air. Just compliance, hands presented, movements slow, deliberate, as if cooperation itself might still be a shield. The cuffs close with a soft metallic sound, quieter than expected, yet louder than anything that has happened in this case for 22 years. Inside the vehicle, the silence deepens, the kind that presses inward, filled not with absence but with weight, because silence after an arrest is never empty. It's crowded with unsaid things, rehearsed explanations, stories told so many times internally they feel like truth. The suspect stares forward, jaw set, breathing steady, the image of composure refined over decades. At headquarters, procedures unfold methodically, names recorded, rights read, time stamped, every step documented with care, because the margin for error has vanished. This is not just an arrest, it is a reckoning delayed, and everyone involved knows that history will examine what happens next with unforgiving precision. The interrogation room is plain, deliberately so, no distractions, no intimidation, just a table, chairs, a camera, and time. The detective enters without flourish, sits, waits, allowing the silence to do its work, because after years of quiet, silence can feel like accusation. When the questions begin, they are simple, almost mundane, confirming identity, routine, the shape of an ordinary life, because extraordinary truths often surface through ordinary details. The suspect answers smoothly, politely, the same calm he has carried since the moment of contact, the confidence of someone who believes preparation equals immunity. But then the past is introduced, gently at first, references to places, dates, relationships, not framed as charges but as shared history, and the room shifts, tension seeping in through pauses, through answers that arrive half a beat too late, through corrections offered too quickly, as if to preempt doubt. The detective watches closely, not for what is said but for how, the subtle changes that betray calculation, the way certain names produce micro-reactions, a tightening around the eyes, a swallow, a shift in posture. These are not confessions but they are signals, markers of pressure points long protected. Evidence is presented incrementally, not as a reveal but as a reminder, fragments aligned, timelines juxtaposed, inconsistencies highlighted not as accusations, but as questions waiting patiently for resolution. The suspect responds with explanations refined by time, plausible, coherent, practiced, yet each one adds weight rather than relief because too much coherence can sound like design. Hours pass unnoticed, the room insulated from the outside world, while beyond its walls whispers begin to spread. A journalist hears something, a former neighbor receives a call, a family member feels a shift they cannot yet name. The city senses movement, the kind that precedes impact. The detective does not rush, does not press too hard, because pressure applied too early can harden defenses, and after 22 years there is no need for haste. The truth has waited this long. It will not vanish now. When the interview pauses, when the suspect is led away, the detective remains seated for a moment longer, reviewing not the answers but the gaps, the spaces where certainty faltered, where rehearsed narratives thinned. This is not closure yet, not justice delivered, but it is the undeniable crossing of a threshold. Elsewhere in the building, phones begin to ring more frequently, internal conversations sharpen, preparations shift from investigation to prosecution. Because an arrest transforms everything, it forces the system to commit, to step out of the shadows of possibility and into the glare of accountability. The family is notified again, this time with words that carry weight, not promises, not conclusions, but confirmation that the person they lost is no longer just a memory attached to a file, that her name has returned to the present tense. Their reaction is fragmented, disbelief colliding with relief, grief resurfacing alongside something dangerously close to hope. Outside, cameras gather, tentative at first, then with growing confidence, lenses pointed at doors that have not mattered in decades, microphones waiting for statements that have been rehearsed but never imagined necessary. The phrase Berlin 2001 cold case reappears louder now, heavier, no longer speculative. Inside the holding area, the suspect sits alone, the mask finally without audience, the quiet no longer protective but exposed, because silence in isolation feels different. It echoes, it confronts, it removes the illusion of control that comes from blending into crowds and routines. For the detective, the night does not end with satisfaction, only with gravity, because arrests do not undo the past, they only acknowledge it, and the road ahead remains long, complex, fraught with legal thresholds and emotional landmines. Yet something fundamental has changed. The case that once drifted in the background of the city's memory now stands in the foreground, demanding attention, demanding answers, demanding that Berlin reckon with what it overlooked, what it normalized, what it allowed to fade. As darkness settles again, the city hums with anticipation, unaware of details but aware of significance, because some stories once reopened, refused to close quietly. And somewhere between the walls of the station and the streets beyond, the cold case exhales, no longer frozen, no longer silent, having finally forced the world to stop pretending it was finished. The news breaks not with a scream but with a ripple, a notification flashing across screens, a headline forming cautiously before hardening into certainty, and within minutes the city feels it, that subtle shift in atmosphere when a long-dormant story resurfaces and refuses to be ignored any longer. Berlin pauses, then leans in, trying to remember what it once chose to forget. Outside the station, microphones multiply, questions stack on top of one another, reporters repeating the same phrases as if repetition itself might unlock clarity. A cold case, a disappearance, an arrest after 22 years, words that feel unreal when spoken together, like pieces from different timelines forced into the same sentence. Officials offer little, carefully measured statements, confirming only what must be confirmed, because too much detail too early can fracture a case as easily as it can inflame a city. Inside, the machinery of justice accelerates, documents prepared, evidence logged, prosecutors briefed, each action tethered to procedure, because this is the stage where precision matters more than momentum. The arrest is only the opening move of a much longer confrontation, one that will test not just the strength of evidence, but the endurance of everyone bound to it. The suspect's lawyer arrives, professional, composed, already assembling a narrative designed to withstand scrutiny, because this is what decades of delay create, not just distance but defense, layers of time that can be weaponized as doubt. Memories fade, witnesses age, contexts change, and the law, for all its power, moves carefully when time itself has become a variable. The interrogation resumes, not as a continuation but as a recalibration, questions now framed with awareness that every word may soon echo in a courtroom, every pause dissected, every inconsistency amplified. The suspect adjusts accordingly, answers tightening, volunteering less, retreating into legal boundaries, a reminder that the truth, once pressured, often seeks refuge in silence. Yet silence has its own cost. The longer the suspect withholds, the more space opens for interpretation, and prosecutors understand this balance well, allowing gaps to speak, letting the contrast between then and now do its quiet work. The story told in 2001 does not sit comfortably beside the reality uncovered in the present, and that discomfort grows with every unanswered question. Beyond the walls of the station, the city begins to talk, neighbors recalling the year, the neighborhood, the feeling that something was wrong but undefined. Old conversations resurface, social media fills with fragments of memory, photos shared, timelines reconstructed collectively, the public becoming its own investigator, sometimes helpful, sometimes dangerous, always loud. For the family, the attention is overwhelming, grief dragged back into daylight after years of careful containment. They are asked to speak, to react, to comment, but words feel inadequate, because how do you summarize 2 decades of waiting into a soundbite? How do you explain the exhaustion of uncertainty to people encountering the story for the first time? They remember the early days, the posters, the phone calls, the promises that answers would come, and they remember the slow withdrawal of interest, the way hope had to be rationed to survive. Now, with an arrest made, hope returns abruptly, uninvited, carrying with it the risk of another loss if the system fails to deliver what it now implies. The prosecutor reviews the evidence with a practiced eye, aware that circumstantial does not mean weak, but also aware that time has given the defense room to maneuver. Every piece must be contextualized, every connection justified, every inference anchored to fact. This is no longer about suspicion, it is about persuasion, about constructing a narrative that can withstand challenge. New forensic results arrive, not definitive but reinforcing, adding texture to a picture already forming, and while they may not answer every question, they reduce the space in which doubt can hide. The case tightens again, not snapping closed, but drawing nearer to a shape that feels complete enough to stand. The suspect is moved, processed, placed within a system designed to contain both bodies and stories, and for the first time in 22 years, he is no longer free to walk the same streets as the memory of the woman who vanished, no longer invisible, no longer unexamined. This, in itself, alters the city's relationship with the past. Berlin absorbs the shock unevenly, some reacting with disbelief, others with grim satisfaction, many with unease because the arrest forces an uncomfortable realization that the person connected to a long-feared mystery was not an outsider, not a transient figure, but someone woven into the fabric of daily life, someone who stood in lines, shared spaces, blended seamlessly. The detective watches the coverage quietly, not for validation but for consequence, because public attention changes dynamics, it introduces pressure, expectations, impatience, and while it can drive accountability, it can also distort. The challenge now is to keep the story anchored to evidence, not emotion, to truth, not spectacle. Late at night, when the station quiets and the headlines stop updating, the detective reviews the case once more, not searching for new leads but for resilience, assessing whether what has been built can withstand what is coming next. Trials are battles of endurance, not just logic, and this one carries the weight of years. The cold case, once defined by absence, now exists in motion, pulled forward by the force of attention, law, and memory, and yet its core remains unresolved, because an arrest is not an answer, it is an invitation to confrontation, a demand that the story finally be told in full. Somewhere in the city, people lie awake, replaying what they thought they knew, wondering how many other silences hide in plain sight, how many ordinary days contain extraordinary secrets waiting for time to betray them. And as Berlin settles into a restless sleep, the case moves deeper into its next phase, no longer asking whether something happened, but insisting that the world decide what to do with the truth it has delayed for so long. The courtroom isn't a room, not really, it's a pressure chamber, and Berlin can feel it even before the doors open, even before the first gavel strike, because once a cold case crosses into the legal world, the rules change, the air thickens, and every detail becomes a weapon, not just against the accused but against time itself. The city wakes to the same headline again, repeated until it loses its shock and becomes a pulse: cold case reopened, surprise arrest, 22-year mystery, and behind those words, a truth most people don't understand until they sit in that room and watch it unfold. Justice doesn't move like a chase, it moves like erosion, slow, persistent, grinding down certainty until only what can be proven survives. Inside the prosecutor's office, the file is no longer a collection of clues. It is a story that must be told without embellishment, without assumptions, without gaps wide enough for doubt to crawl through. Each page is reread like scripture. Each timeline is rebuilt with the obsessive care of someone handling explosives. Because a case this old is fragile in ways the public never sees. Witnesses forget. Evidence degrades. Context shifts. And the defense will not need to prove innocence. The defense only needs to fracture confidence. They begin by attacking the clock because time is the most convenient alibi. 22 years. 22 years of memory turning soft at the edges. 22 years of the city changing names and faces in streets. 22 years of someone building a normal life on top of the past like fresh concrete, poured over a crime scene. In court they will say it plainly: how can you trust anything after so long? How can you trust a recollection, a glance, a sound in the night? How can you trust the human mind not to invent what it wants to believe? And that is the first shockwave Berlin doesn't expect. Not the arrest, not the headlines, but the sudden realization that truth and proof are not the same thing, that something can feel inevitable and still be legally uncertain, that the cold case isn't solved the moment someone is handcuffed, it's only dragged into a place where it can be killed again, this time by language. The detective knows this. The detective has seen it before. The detective watches the case shift from investigation to performance, not in a theatrical sense, but in the way every word must land correctly, every fact must be placed so a jury can hold it without dropping it. There are meetings that last hours. Strategy laid out like a battlefield map. Witness lists. Exhibit lists. Expert reports. Every piece aligned to answer the defense before the defense even speaks. But there is another problem. Another enemy. Not just the defense, not just time, but the hunger of the public. The city wants a villain. The city wants closure. The city wants the story to end with the satisfying snap of certainty. Yet courtrooms do not exist to satisfy hunger. They exist to test the strength of a claim. And that testing feels to the outside world like doubt, like backpedaling, like weakness, like betrayal. On the first day of preliminary proceedings, cameras cluster outside like insects around light. Names are withheld. Details are guarded. People shout questions that don't deserve answers yet. The family arrives quietly, not together at first, separated by the weight of their own reactions, their own grief patterns, their own private fatigue. Their faces carry the exhaustion of a long war fought in silence. Some of them avoid the cameras. Some of them stare straight through them, expression fixed, as if refusing to let the city feed on their pain. Inside, the air is colder than it should be. The accused enters flanked by officers, posture controlled, eyes scanning the room with a calm that feels offensive to anyone who has carried this story in their chest for decades. He looks like a man who has lived a long time without consequence because he has. He sits. He speaks only when required. He lets his lawyer do the work, a lawyer whose voice is smooth and practiced, the kind of voice that can turn uncertainty into a strategy. The prosecutor speaks next, outlining the case with disciplined restraint, refusing drama, refusing the temptation to inflate, because this is where overstatement becomes fatal. The prosecution lays out a sequence of events, a web of connections, a pattern of proximity, inconsistencies that have hardened over time into something sharper. The judge listens with a face that reveals nothing, because judges are trained to be stone, and the room aches for the slightest hint of direction. The defense begins with a familiar move, a surgical one. They cut the narrative away from emotion. They say the disappearance was tragic, yes. They say everyone sympathizes, yes. But sympathy is not proof. Then they point to the gaps, not just the gaps in evidence, but the gaps in the original investigation, implying incompetence without saying it outright, suggesting that the system failed and is now trying to correct its embarrassment by attaching the case to someone convenient. They mention the years. Again, they mention the absence of a body. They mention the absence of a crime scene. They mention how easy it is to reinterpret ordinary behavior through the lens of hindsight. They mention how dangerous it is to let a story become an answer. And the detective feels the room lean just slightly, because doubt is contagious, and once introduced it spreads quickly, especially in a case built on fragments stitched across decades. That's when the prosecution shifts, not louder, not angrier, but more precise. They bring in the first witness, not someone dramatic, not someone who saw everything, but someone ordinary, because ordinary witnesses make extraordinary stories feel real. A neighbor, a coworker, a friend, each one asked to remember. The neighbor describes the street as it was in 2001, the light, the quiet, the way Berlin sounded then. They speak about a noise, a car door, an argument, something small. The defense cross-examines with a smile that never reaches the eyes, asking about the year, the month, the weather, the exact time, pushing until memory trembles, until the witness admits they cannot be certain. The coworker describes a shift in routine, a tension, a distraction, a glance at the door that seemed too frequent, too careful. The defense asks about stress, about personal issues, about how easy it is to read fear into an ordinary bad day. The witness swallows. Their hands grip the stand. Their voice wavers. And the courtroom sees what time has done, how it turns even genuine recollection into something that can be questioned. This is the tightrope. This is the agony. The family watches each witness struggle to hold their own memories steady, while lawyers try to shake them loose. They feel the past being debated like an object in someone else's hands. They want to stand up and scream that this isn't theory. This is their life, their mother, their sister, their daughter, their empty chair at every holiday. But court doesn't allow screams. Court allows evidence. Between sessions in hallways that smell like coffee and paper, The detective studies the accused from a distance, watching how he moves, how he interacts with his lawyer, how he avoids looking at the family. There's a discipline there, a refusal to leak emotion. The detective has met men like this before. Not all of them are guilty, but all of them understand control. The press tries to extract meaning from posture, from facial expressions, from pauses. They talk about the accused calmness as if calmness is guilt. They talk about the family's grief as if grief is proof. Social media turns each moment into a verdict. The city becomes a jury long before any official one is seated. And then comes the moment that shifts the tone again, the moment that pulls the case back from the edge of doubt and forces it into sharper focus. The prosecution introduces an expert, not to deliver a cinematic gotcha, but to explain the science that didn't exist in 2001, the advances that allow old evidence to be reinterpreted with new clarity. The expert speaks in measured terms, careful language, probabilities, exclusions, consistencies. Not certainty, but direction. Enough to narrow the field. Enough to make coincidence harder to believe. The defense attacks the science too because that's what defense does, questioning lab procedures, chain of custody, contamination risk, the simple fact that old items have passed through many hands. They raise the possibility of error. They raise the possibility of narrative shaping the interpretation of data. They raise the possibility that the prosecution, hungry to solve a cold case, might see what it wants to see. The courtroom feels like it's breathing in and out, hope and doubt, like waves hitting the same shore. The family leaves some days feeling hollow, other days feeling something almost like vindication. The detective leaves every day feeling the same thing. Pressure, because this is where the system either holds or collapses. And outside, Berlin begins to recognize itself in the story, not because everyone knew the victim, but because everyone understands the terror of an ordinary morning turning into permanent absence. People look at their own routines differently. They lock doors twice. They watch strangers longer. They remember how the city felt in 2001, how it promised safety while hiding corners where anything could happen. As the proceedings continue, something subtle changes in the accused. Not a confession, not a breakdown, but a shift in tension, a tightening around his eyes, a rigidity in his jaw when certain details are mentioned, a reaction too small for the cameras but not too small for the detective. It's as if the walls are moving inward, not dramatically, just steadily, forcing him to live in a space he thought he escaped. And then late in the day, as people gather their papers and the courtroom begins to empty, the detective receives a message that stops him cold. A message that doesn't belong to the rhythm of routine legal work. A message that feels like the past reaching out with a new hand, a new piece, a new problem, the kind that can either destroy everything or seal it shut forever. Not a rumor, not a theory, something tangible, something that wasn't in the file before. The detective looks up, eyes scanning the room, the accused already being led away, the family already stepping into the hallway, the city already rewriting the story in real time, and he feels the case tilt again, as if it has been building toward this moment all along, toward a revelation that will not be gentle. Because cold cases don't just wake up once. Sometimes they wake up twice. And Berlin, still hungry for closure, has no idea that the most dangerous part of this story may not be the disappearance in 2001, but what is about to surface now, in the present, when everyone believes the mystery is already ending. The message comes in like a shard of ice pressed against the back of the neck, not loud, not dramatic, just a few words on a screen that force the detective's breathing to slow because anything faster might turn this into panic, and panic is how mistakes happen, and mistakes are how cold cases die a second time. A storage facility, a unit number, a name that is not the accused, but close enough to scrape the same nerve. A clerk who finally decided to talk after recognizing a face on the news. And a phrase that stings with its own quiet horror, unpaid for years. The detective doesn't react outwardly. He cannot. Not here, not with cameras outside. Not with the courtroom still warm from arguments and doubt. He simply folds his notebook, gathers his papers and walks as if nothing has changed, because in this world, the smallest visible shift can leak into the wrong ears, and once it leaks it cannot be called back. Berlin's streets look ordinary as he moves through them, and that ordinariness is almost insulting. The way life continues while the past claws up through asphalt. The way commuters sip coffee and check their phones while somewhere behind their routines. A locked metal door might be holding the answer that has been withheld for 22 years. He thinks of the victim's family, their faces when they heard the word arrest, the fragile hope that rose like a hand reaching for air, and he thinks of how quickly hope can be drowned if what lies behind that door is nothing, or worse, if it's something that complicates rather than closes. The storage facility sits on the edge of the city's attention, one of those utilitarian spaces built for secrecy without intending to be. Rows of identical units, identical locks, identical gray metal that makes everything inside feel interchangeable. The clerk is waiting, nervous, wringing his hands, the kind of man who has rehearsed this moment in his head since the first headline hit, the kind of man who never wanted to be involved but has realized too late that he already is. He says he saw the accused on television and felt a jolt of recognition that made his stomach drop because years ago, he can't remember exactly when, only that it was early, only that it was around the time the disappearance happened. Someone rented a unit, paid in cash, insisted on minimal paperwork, spoke politely but too carefully, and for a while everything seemed normal. Then the payments stopped. The unit remained sealed. No one came. And because storage facilities are full of abandoned secrets, the unit became just another locked door among hundreds, a quiet problem waiting for bureaucracy to decide its fate. The detective listens without interrupting, letting the man's memory spill out in messy fragments, then asks for the records. The paperwork is thin, but thin is still something. A signature, a date, a contact number long dead, and a note from an employee, written in the careless shorthand of routine, that now reads like a prophecy. Customer requested no calls. The detective's mind maps the implications instantly. A unit rented around the time of the disappearance. Abandoned. Unpaid. Forgotten. This could be nothing. Could be old furniture. Could be stolen goods. It could be the kind of meaningless clutter people run from when their lives collapse. But it could also be the thing cold cases dream of and fear equally. The tangible anchor that turns a narrative into a verdict. A warrant is requested, obtained with a speed that reflects how fast the system can move, when the past suddenly offers something solid to grip. A small team arrives. Gloves. Evidence bags. Cameras. Procedure tightened like a noose. The detective watches the unit's lock as if it might speak before it opens. A small circle of metal that has held its silence for decades. The bolt cutter bites. The lock gives with a dull snap that feels louder than it should. The door rolls upward, slow, reluctant, and the air that spills out is stale, trapped, carrying the faint signature of time. Dust, oil, cardboard, the dry scent of abandonment. For a second, nothing is visible but shadow and indistinct shapes, and then the flashlight beam moves, sweeping the interior, landing on stacked boxes, plastic bins, a rolled rug leaning against the back wall, and the detective feels his throat tighten, because even if the unit holds no body, it holds intention, and intention is its own kind of evidence. They begin carefully, one item at a time, documenting everything in place before touching it, because in court, the way you find something matters almost as much as what you find. The first box contains ordinary clutter. Old clothes, magazines, household items, things that feel almost cruel in their normality. Another box holds tools. Another holds photographs, not of the victim, but of places, streets, corners of the city, as if someone cataloged geography the way hunters catalog terrain. Then the detective sees it, not hidden, not buried, but placed with a precision that feels deliberate. A plastic sleeve containing a small object that catches the flashlight and throws back a dull glint. A keychain. Simple. Worn. The kind of thing that could belong to anyone, which is why it punches so hard, because the file has a photograph, and in that photograph on the victim's kitchen table, there is a similar keychain attached to keys that were left behind. Left behind because she did not return to pick them up. Left behind because she did not walk away willingly. No one speaks. They don't need to. The air changes. The unit is no longer ambiguous. It's a room of choices made in 2001, choices that have been sitting here undisturbed, waiting for a witness to recognize a face on television. They keep going. A sealed bag inside a bin. Inside that bag, fabric folded carefully. Not a full garment, just a portion, as if something had been cut away. The forensic technician takes it without expression, but the detective sees the way the technician's hands become more deliberate, more controlled, because fabrics carry stories, fibers, hairs, traces, silent testimony that can survive long after voices fail. Then the rolled rug at the back becomes the center of gravity. It is heavy. too heavy for comfort. Wrapped in plastic that has yellowed with age, tape brittle, edges peeling slightly as if the unit itself has been breathing, exhaling microscopic hints into the air. The team photographs it, measures it, notes its position, and in the detective's mind the title on every headline shifts, because surprise arrest is one kind of shock, but a rug rolled in plastic in a locked unit is something else, a physical embodiment of dread. They do not unroll it here. They won't. Not without the right space, the right containment, the right chain of custody. The detective insists on it with a sharpness that surprises even him, because he knows how fragile this moment is. One careless action, one procedural mistake, and the defense will carve it open like a wound and bleed out all over the courtroom. The rug is transported under guard. The boxes, the bins, everything removed and catalogued. The storage unit is sealed again, now a crime scene, now a place that will appear in testimony, in diagrams, in photographs projected on courtroom screens where strangers will stare at it and decide what it means. Back at headquarters, the detective receives another message, another jolt. The accused has requested to speak. Not through his lawyer. Directly. It's unexpected. It's dangerous. Could be manipulation. Could be panic. It could be the moment the walls finally closed enough to force a crack. The detective waits before responding. He watches the legal machinery click into place, permissions confirmed, recording equipment prepared, counsel notified. Then he enters the interview room again, and the accused looks different. Not broken, not frantic, but changed, as if something outside his control has finally touched him. His eyes are steadier than fear would make them, but there is a tension there, a tightness around the mouth that suggests calculation is now working overtime. He speaks softly. He says he doesn't understand why they keep dragging his name through the past. He says he's been cooperative. He says this is a witch hunt fueled by media hysteria. His voice is calm, but his calmness now feels thinner, like fabric stretched too far. The detective doesn't argue. He doesn't accuse. He asks one question, almost gentle, about the storage facility, about the unit, about why his face would be recognized there. The accused gaze flickers just briefly, not toward the detective, but toward the table, as if the wood might offer a safer answer than truth. He says he has never rented a storage unit. He says he doesn't know what they're talking about. He says perhaps someone is confusing him with someone else. He says a lot of words to create distance. Too many. The detective lets silence stretch. In that silence, the accused shifts, shoulders tightening, fingers tapping once, then stopping, as if he realized even the smallest movement could be read. The detective leans in slightly, not as threat but as inevitability, and says that the unit was paid in cash, that it was abandoned, that it was rented under a name that is now connected to him through records that did not exist in 2001 but exist now, because time doesn't just erase, it also reveals. The accused jaw clenches. He breathes in slow. He asks what they found. It's a question dressed as casual curiosity, but it's too sharp, too hungry, and in that instant the detective feels something settle into place. Not proof, not yet, but confirmation of pressure. I can't discuss evidence, the detective says, because he cannot, because the law is a blade with two edges, and he has learned to respect both. The accused nods as if that answer satisfies him. Then he looks up and says something that hits harder than any denial, something that sounds like an attempt at control, at narrative, at rewriting the emotional center of the case with a single phrase. After 22 years you think you can know what happened? It's not a confession. It's not even an admission. But it's a challenge, and it carries the smugness of someone who has lived in the gap between knowing and proving for so long that he has mistaken it for safety. The detective leaves the room with his mind on the rug, on the keychain, on the folded fabric, on the ordinary boxes that now feel like props in a nightmare staged years ago and stored like inventory. He thinks of the courtroom, of how the defense will attack this, how they will claim planting, contamination, coincidence, how they will try to turn a locked unit into a question instead of an answer. Outside, the press senses something. They always do. There is movement, and movement becomes rumor, and rumor becomes headlines. The words "new evidence" begin to circulate in whispers that grow teeth. The family hears it too, not through official channels yet, but through the vibrations of a city that cannot keep secrets once it believes the ending is near. That night, the detective stands in the evidence lab observation window and watches technicians prepare the rug for examination. The room sterile, bright, controlled, like a surgical theater. The rug lies on a table under harsh light. It looks almost harmless in this setting, just fabric, just fibers, just something you might step on without thinking. But the detective knows what it represents. The possibility that the city's oldest question might finally have a physical answer. The technicians begin, slow, meticulous, cutting tape, peeling plastic, documenting every layer, because every layer is a timeline, every layer a decision, and as the plastic pulls away, the smell changes, subtle but unmistakable, and the detective feels his stomach tighten, because even before anything is seen, the air is telling a story. Berlin sleeps outside, restless, unaware of what is unfolding behind sealed doors, unaware that the line between mystery and horror is thinning, that the case is about to shift again, not in court arguments, not in memory battles, but in the raw, undeniable language of matter. And as the rug is finally unrolled by gloved hands, slowly, reluctantly, as if the fabric itself resists exposure, the detective realizes with a cold clarity that the surprise arrest was never the end of the 22-year mystery. It was only the beginning of what the city is about to learn. The rug opens like a mouth that has been sealed for 22 years, and the first thing that hits isn't what anyone sees, it's what the air carries. Stale plastic, dust, a faint metallic note that doesn't belong in a storage unit, a smell so thin you could deny it exists, yet so specific it reaches into the body and pulls a reaction before the mind can name it. The technicians don't flinch outwardly, they never do, but their movements change, becoming even slower, even more careful, as if every millimeter of fabric might hold a sentence the city has been waiting to read since 2001. The detective watches from behind glass, hands still, jaw set, feeling time compress into this sterile room where the past is about to be measured and photographed and bagged, stripped of myth, reduced to trace. The rug is unremarkable in color, the kind of thing you could buy anywhere, which is exactly what makes it terrifying. Evil rarely arrives decorated. It arrives ordinary. It arrives blended. It arrives looking like something you've stepped over 1,000 times without noticing. Under the bright lab lights, the technicians document the weave, the fibers, the tape residue, the layers of plastic wrapping, each detail treated like a potential fingerprint of intention. They scan for biological traces. They swab edges. They test seams where fluid might have pooled, where hair might have snagged, where skin cells might have clung and endured through years of darkness. A quiet beep from a device sounds too loud. Another beep. Then the room settles into that tense silence that follows a signal, because everyone understands what a signal means. Possibility. The detective's phone vibrates, but he doesn't look. Not yet. Not while the rug sits exposed like an accusation. He watches the technician lift one corner and shine a light across it at an angle, the way you search for what doesn't want to be seen, and for a moment the fabric looks clean, just old, just neglected. Then the light catches something different, a faint discoloration, subtle, uneven, like a shadow that refuses to fully disappear. The technician marks it without comment. Another mark follows. Then another. A pattern begins to form across the underside. And the detective feels his chest tighten, because patterns are what turn accidents into stories. A rapid test yields a preliminary result. The kind of result that makes people choose their words carefully. Presumptive for blood. Not confirmed yet. Not definitive. But enough to turn the lab's atmosphere into something heavier. Enough to make the detective's mind flash to headlines he can already imagine. Cold case evidence reveals blood traces. Berlin disappearance linked to new forensic find. Chilling discovery in storage unit. He hears those lines as if they're already being read aloud on screens across the city. Confirmatory testing begins. The lab shifts into deeper protocol, samples labeled, chain of custody reinforced, because now the stakes have escalated into the realm where one misstep becomes a defense attorney's favorite weapon. The detective knows the defense will say contamination. The defense will say planted. The defense will say coincidence. The defense will say the rug is just a rug. And if the prosecution can't prove otherwise with clean, documented science, the rug will become an object of suspicion rather than proof. Hours pass in a blur of controlled motion. The detective finally checks his phone. Messages stack like bricks. A prosecutor asking for updates. A colleague warning that the press is circling, sensing movement. A note that the family has heard rumors and wants answers. Another note, colder, simpler. The accused has refused further questioning unless new evidence is disclosed to his counsel. Not panic. Strategy. Control. Always control. The lab results come back in layers like the rug itself. Blood confirmed. Human. A profile partial at first, then refined. The detective watches the numbers assemble, the genetic markers aligning like stars forming a shape, and when the technician finally speaks, voice quiet, precise, the detective feels the floor shift beneath him even though he is standing still. The DNA is consistent with the missing woman's biological profile, drawn from reference samples gathered years ago, updated with modern methods. Not a rumor. Not a memory. Not a theory. A biological whisper surviving 22 years, now loud enough to be heard. The detective doesn't celebrate. He can't. There is no joy in the confirmation that a person likely bled, likely suffered, likely died. There is only gravity, the kind that drags everyone back to the moment the case should have resolved but didn't, the moment Berlin should have known but couldn't. He thinks of the victim's apartment, the untouched keys, the ordinary dishes, the sudden pause. He thinks of the family telling themselves she might still be alive somewhere. This result doesn't announce death in a legal sense, but it pulls hope toward the edge of a cliff. And yet even now, even with blood on a rug in a locked unit, the case remains a corridor rather than a room. Because blood explains violence, not location. Blood confirms contact, not confession. Blood suggests death, but it doesn't produce a body, and without a body, the defense will build an entire universe where violence happened but did not equal murder, where the victim bled but survived, where the rug was used for something else, where the accused is linked but not responsible, where the story is still unclear enough to doubt. Berlin meanwhile erupts. The press gets wind of new forensic developments, and the city's appetite returns with teeth. News vans crowd streets near the courthouse. Cameras chase anyone who might speak. The words cold case are everywhere again, printed in bold, paired with phrases like mysterious disappearance, shocking discovery, 22 years of silence. The family is brought in to be briefed privately, away from microphones, away from strangers' curiosity. The detective chooses his words like he's walking on broken glass. He explains what was found. He explains what it means. He explains what it. They ask one question that lands like a hammer. Where is she? And the detective has no answer. The prosecutor moves quickly because now they can. Search warrants expand. Old locations resurface. Areas dismissed years ago are re-examined. The storage unit records are mined for every trace of movement, every timestamp, every security log, every employee memory. Investigators trace the rental to a paper trail that was once too faint to follow, now sharper with connected databases and archived transactions. They find a vehicle registration linked indirectly, an address history that aligns with a remote lot outside the city, a phone number that once pinged towers near a forested area just after the disappearance. The case becomes kinetic, a machine turning faster, powered by a single confirmed biological fact. The defense responds immediately. They hold their own press statement, carefully worded, condemning speculation, warning against trial by media, reminding the public that forensic evidence must be contextualized. They emphasize the absence of a body. They emphasize the length of time. They imply the possibility that someone else rented the unit. They suggest that the accused likeness could be mistaken. They call it a frenzy. They call it injustice. They do what defense always does when the story is dangerous. They try to loosen the grip the public is placing on it. In the courtroom, the judge tightens restrictions. Sealed motions. Limited disclosures. The case is now radioactive and everyone can feel it. Jurors, when the time comes, will have to be screened for exposure to headlines, for opinions formed before evidence is heard. The trial will not just be about what happened in 2001, but about whether the system can still deliver truth after the world has already started writing its own ending. The detective returns to the interview room with new permission, new leverage, new evidence heavy enough to sit on the table without being described. The accused enters again, escorted, posture controlled, but the mask now shows fine fractures. Not fear, not surrender, but irritation, the kind that comes when control is threatened. His lawyer sits close, whispering, guarding. The detective doesn't accuse. He doesn't need to. He mentions only one thing, quietly, like a headline read in a room without cameras. The storage unit. The accused eyes harden. His lawyer speaks before he does, objecting, demanding disclosure, controlling the flow. The detective watches this dance and feels the old frustration rise. Not at the lawyer, not at the accused, but at time itself, because time has allowed these defenses to grow sophisticated, to anticipate the system's moves, to treat truth like a negotiable commodity. The detective offers a choice without calling it one. Cooperation can shape outcomes. Silence can harden them. He says nothing about the rug. He says nothing about the blood. He lets the accused mind fill the blanks, because imagination under pressure can be more effective than confrontation. The accused leans back slightly, lips pressing into a line, and says almost casually, almost bored, "People store all kinds of things." It's a small sentence designed to be harmless, but it's wrong in a way that stings. Too familiar, too knowing, too prepared to normalize what should not be normal. The detective feels the urge to push harder, to slam the table with truth, to say her blood was there, to watch the mask fall. But this is not a movie. This is a cold case sharpened into a courtroom blade. The detective holds back. He documents. He waits. He lets the accused speak around the silence until the speech itself becomes a shape of avoidance. When the interview ends, the detective steps into the corridor and hears, faintly, the building's distant noise. Phones, footsteps, doors, the sound of a system mobilizing under public scrutiny. He looks at the case file as if it's no longer paper but a living thing, demanding not just closure but correctness. A wrong conviction would be another disappearance, another injustice layered on top of the first. And yet the evidence now has teeth. The past is not merely remembered, it is physically present. Search teams deploy outside Berlin, combing areas tied to old pings and new records, looking for disturbed earth, for hidden containers, for anything the city might have absorbed without noticing. Dogs move through trees. Metal rods probe soil. Investigators stare at maps until the lines blur. Every location becomes a potential grave. Every patch of woodland a possible answer. And still, nothing is guaranteed because time is merciless with bodies. Time scatters. Time dissolves. Time buries and then forgets. At night, the detective sits alone and replays the day like footage in his mind. The rug unrolled, the tests, the confirmation, the family's faces, the accused calm recalibrating into irritation, the city's hunger swelling again. He knows the story is changing, accelerating, but he also knows something else, something colder. The closer a case gets to being solved, the more violently it can resist resolution because resolution requires surrender, and people who have survived 22 years of silence are experts at refusing. Berlin, for all its noise, holds its breath again, not because it has learned patience, but because it senses that the next revelation could be definitive, or it could be catastrophic, and either way, the story will not be able to return to sleep. The cold case has produced blood. It has produced a storage unit. It has produced an arrest that shocked the community. But the one thing it still has not produced is the one thing the family has waited for since 2001. The one thing that would turn this from a mystery into a funeral, from a headline into a goodbye. And until that final truth is found, Berlin's 22-year shadow remains standing. No longer silent, no longer frozen, but still, in its deepest core, unresolved. Berlin doesn't wait quietly. It never has. It waits like a city with its foot on the gas, restless, impatient, leaning toward the next update the way a crowd leans toward a stage. And now the stage is everywhere. Courtroom steps, police tape at woodland edges, the cold glow of late-night news screens, and the private kitchens where families who never met the victim still feel the story scrape across their sense of safety. The search expands in widening circles, not because anyone believes the truth will announce itself neatly, but because the alternative, doing nothing, feels like letting the past win again. Teams move through forests and vacant lots outside the city, probing soil, scanning for anomalies, listening for the smallest contradiction in the landscape, because time changes terrain the way it changes stories, softening edges, erasing disturbances, turning evidence into rumor and rumor into nothing. Dogs work patterns that look almost graceful from a distance, but up close it's all intensity, all discipline, all urgency packed into movement, and every time a handler pauses, every time a dog's posture shifts, every breath in the line tightens like a wire. The detective watches the search with a mind split between two worlds. The physical world of mud and trees and buried silence, and the courtroom world where language is the only weapon allowed, where a defense attorney can turn even confirmed blood into a question by asking it correctly. He knows what the public thinks this is now, a straight line to closure, a simple equation, arrest plus evidence equals solved, But cold cases don't end like that, not cleanly, not without cost, and not without the system proving step by step that its momentum hasn't become desperation. Inside the legal process, everything slows and sharpens at the same time. Motions are filed, arguments refined, experts prepared to speak in careful terms that will never satisfy the hunger of headlines. The prosecutor meets with the detective late into the night, not to celebrate progress but to stress test it, to identify every weakness before the defense can exploit it. They rehearse the narrative not as drama but as structure, how the story must be told so it cannot be easily dismantled. The disappearance, the early dead ends, the re-examination, the storage unit, the forensic confirmation, the suspect's proximity and inconsistencies, the pattern of control. The defense works with equal intensity, because time is their ally and spectacle is their shield. They argue contamination risk. They argue chain of custody vulnerability. They argue that storage facilities are porous stories, full of abandoned items that can be misattributed. They argue that the investigation, under pressure and under cameras, has shaped itself around a suspect because the city demanded someone to blame. They speak about presumption like it's a disease, and they have a point in one sense. Public certainty can become a fog that blinds people to nuance, to legal thresholds, to what proof actually requires. Berlin's reaction begins to fracture along familiar lines. Some people are convinced the case is solved, already speaking as if a verdict has been delivered, as if the missing woman's story can finally be wrapped up and shelved. Others push back hard, suspicious of systems, suspicious of timing, suspicious of how easily society chooses an ending once it's tired of waiting. The case becomes more than a case. It becomes an argument about memory, about trust, about what a city owes its dead and its missing and its living. The family stays mostly out of sight now, not because their pain has lessened, but because attention has become predatory. Every camera wants the moment they break. Every reporter wants the line that will become the emotional centerpiece of the evening broadcast. And the family, having survived 22 years of uncertainty, has learned that private grief is the only kind that doesn't get stolen. Still, the detective can feel them behind every decision, behind every late-night meeting, behind every cautious wording. Their question sits like a stone in the center of the room. Where is she? In the station, the accused becomes a silent gravitational force. He is present even when he is not in the room, because every step taken now is a step taken in relation to him. His history, his denials, his calm, his small verbal slips that suggest familiarity where he claims ignorance. His lawyer requests disclosures, files objections, tries to control narrative flow. The accused himself says little. But the detective senses something shifting beneath the silence, an internal calculation turning faster, because people who have lived under the protection of time become dangerous when time stops protecting them. A new lead surfaces from an old place, the kind that makes investigators curse under their breath because it should have been obvious earlier, and yet obviousness is a luxury you only earn in hindsight. A former acquaintance of the accused, contacted as part of routine background work, mentions an out-of-character trip in 2001, a sudden absence from work, an excuse offered casually and never questioned. The exact date is unclear because it was a long time ago, because lives were busy, because memory does what it does. But the detail sends the detective back to the timeline, back to the days after the disappearance when the city was still quiet enough for someone to move something without being seen. Phone tower pings from that period, once too scattered to interpret, are reprocessed with modern mapping, and a cluster appears like a bruise on the edge of the city, an area near an old industrial corridor where construction later reshaped the landscape. The detective feels his pulse tighten, because construction is both eraser and preservative, capable of burying evidence deeper than anyone ever intended, sealing it under concrete, transforming a potential crime scene into a parking lot that thousands cross daily without knowing what lies beneath. Permission is requested to survey that zone. It's slow, bureaucratic, contested. Property owners resist. Legal teams argue over scope. The defense watches closely, ready to claim a fishing expedition, ready to paint investigators as desperate. The detective persists anyway, because the case has reached the stage where waiting is riskier than action, and because the city's memory is now too awake to be put back to sleep without something final. When access is granted, the search becomes clinical, almost surgical. Ground-penetrating equipment, soil sampling, small excavations, each one documented, each one performed with an awareness that anything found will not only shape the prosecution's case, but also shape the city's emotional landscape. The detective stands at the perimeter and watches machines move earth with careful restraint, and he thinks about how strange it is that after 2 decades, after all the noise and theory, the answer might come down to centimeters of dirt. Hours stretch. Nothing emerges at first. The public grows impatient. Online speculation turns cruel, accusing the police of staging, of incompetence, of hiding information. The detective ignores it as best he can, because public opinion is weather loud, shifting, often wrong, and evidence is stone, slow, and stubborn. Then a technician calls for a pause, voice tight, and the entire site goes still. Not because something has been definitively found, but because something doesn't match the ground around it, an irregularity that demands attention. The detective moves closer but not too close. This is not a moment to contaminate. This is not a moment to let emotion rush into procedure. They work with hand tools now. Careful scraping. Gentle brushing. The kind of labor that feels almost reverent because the earth is no longer just earth, it's a vault. The detective watches the shape emerge gradually indistinct and he feels a familiar dread rising. Not because he wants it to be something, but because if it is something it will hurt, and if it is nothing it will hurt in a different way. The object is retrieved and sealed for analysis. It is not a body. It is not closure. It is a fragment of possibility that will take days to interpret properly, and the delay feels like torture, because the city wants the scene to end here with an answer pulled cleanly from the soil, but life doesn't do that. Cold cases certainly don't. Back at the station, the detective sits in an office that smells faintly of paper and coffee and fatigue, and he realizes the case has become a corridor of doors, each one leading to another, each one promising resolution and delivering only more thresholds. The storage unit gave them blood but not location. The tower cluster gave them a search zone but not certainty. The accused gave them contradictions but not confession. Everything points, everything presses, but nothing yet seals the story shut. The prosecutor calls and speaks in that controlled tone that means they are trying not to show strain. The preliminary blood result is strong, yes. The storage unit ties into the accused orbit, yes. But the defense is preparing to argue alternative explanations for every link. Without a body, without a definitive mechanism, without a clear narrative of how disappearance became death, the case will rely on cumulative force, on showing the jury a pattern so coherent that innocence becomes unreasonable. It's possible. It's also risky. And risk in court is always paid for by families, by victims, by public trust. That night, the detective visits the evidence room again because obsession is part of the job and because the objects in this case have become louder than people. He stares at the keychain sealed in plastic, at the folded fabric samples, at the photographs from the storage unit, and he feels something like anger, not the hot kind but the cold kind that builds over years, the anger that someone could treat a life like an inconvenience to be stored and forgotten. He thinks about the accused sentence. People store all kinds of things, and it echoes differently now, as if it weren't just a remark but a window into a worldview where normalizing horror is the ultimate defense. The city's noise continues outside, but inside the detective's mind there is only one sound. The question the case has always been asking, now sharpened to a point that hurts to hold. What happened after she stepped into the morning and never came back? And then, near midnight, a new development arrives, quiet but heavy, the kind of update that shifts the emotional center of the case without producing a public headline yet. The lab analysis of the object recovered from the soil is consistent with something personal, something that would not be there by accident, something that can be traced not to the accused, not to the state, but to her life, her routines, her presence. An anchor that suggests the search zone is not just a bruise on a map, but a wound in the earth. The detective feels his throat tighten as he reads it, because this is the closest the case has come to answering the family's question without saying the word everyone is afraid to say. He thinks of the family again, the way their faces held both hope and dread when the case reopened, and he realizes the true cruelty of cold cases. They do not resolve once. They resolve in stages, each stage taking something away, each stage replacing uncertainty with a different kind of pain. Berlin is on the edge now, not of a headline, but of an ending that will not feel like an ending at all, because no ending can return 22 years, no ending can undo the emptiness at the center of a family, no ending can make a city feel innocent again. And as the detective prepares for the next day, The next search, the next legal battle, the next careful conversation with a family that has waited too long. He understands with a clarity that makes the air feel thinner. The case is close to closing, yes, but closure is not the same as peace, and when Berlin finally learns what happened in full, the shock will not come from the surprise arrest. The shock will come from how ordinary the path to horror was, and how long it took the world to notice. The city wakes again under a sky that looks ordinary enough to lie, and that's the cruelest part, the way Berlin can wear normal light while something irreversible moves beneath it, the way traffic can flow and cafes can fill and people can argue about headlines while, out on the edge of town, investigators stand over a patch of ground that feels heavier than it should, because it has been holding a secret that never belonged to it. The detective arrives before the cameras can fully organize themselves, before the story can turn into spectacle again, and the site looks different in the morning, less like a search and more like a ritual, tape lines tightened, personnel quieter, movements restrained, as if everyone understands that this is no longer a hunt for possibility but an approach to something fragile, something final, something that will not survive careless hands or loud voices. They work slowly, carefully, stripping soil away in thin layers, not because they want to prolong the moment but because the ground has become evidence and evidence must be treated like glass. And while the machines wait at a distance, the real work happens with brushes, small tools, gloved fingers that move with the patience of people who know that a life can be reduced to fragments and still be sacred. The detective keeps his eyes on the technicians, the way their posture shifts when they find something that doesn't belong, the way their voices drop into a professional hush that carries its own kind of warning, and when the call comes quiet, steady, controlled, he feels time tilt, not dramatically, not with cinematic thunder, but with that internal lurch that happens when you realize a story is about to change its category. They don't say the word out loud at first. They don't need to. The protocols speak for them. The perimeter tightens. The documentation intensifies. The air goes still. Someone calls for a forensic pathologist. Someone confirms chain of custody again. As if repeating it could reinforce the thin line between truth and doubt. The detective steps closer, not into the pit, not into the space where contamination becomes a weapon, but close enough to see the shape emerging in the soil. A shape that once belonged to movement and breath and routines and plans. It's not a moment of victory. It's not relief. It's grief arriving with a badge and a clipboard. Berlin doesn't hear it immediately, not in the way the city heard the arrest, not in the way it devoured the phrase cold case reopened, because this kind of discovery travels slower, filtered through caution, through law, through the need to be correct before being loud. But the city senses it anyway. People always do. A tightening in the way reporters hover. A change in the police presence. A shift in tone when officials refuse to answer questions, and yet refuse to deny anything. The rumor forms before facts are released, and rumor in Berlin spreads like weather. The detective's phone vibrates again and again, messages stacking, but he ignores them until the evidence is secured, until the site is stabilized, until the truth is placed inside the system's hands as carefully as the system can manage. Only then does he step away, find a quiet space and read the prosecutor's texts, the clipped language, the urgency held on a leash. Confirm as soon as possible, coordinate statements, limit leaks, prepare family notification. Family notification. Those words are never neutral. They carry the weight of everything you cannot say and everything you must. The detective drives back into the city with a tightness in his chest that doesn't loosen at red lights, passing streets that look unchanged, passing people who have no idea that the 22-year mystery has shifted from question to consequence, and he thinks about how strange it is that answers, when they finally arrive, do not feel like the end of pain but like a new beginning of it, a different pain. One that has sharper edges because it is real. At headquarters, the prosecutor meets him in a corridor, eyes tired, face set, the look of someone who understands that the strongest evidence in the world still has to survive the brutal simplicity of court. Prove it. The prosecutor asks for what can be said, what can be shown, what can be sworn under oath, and the detective answers carefully, because even now, especially now, the truth needs discipline. They talk about identification, about timelines, about how to frame the discovery without giving the defense an opening to call it premature, speculative, emotional. The defense will come hard. The defense will claim the search was guided by confirmation bias. The defense will say the object recovered from the soil could have traveled, could have been placed, could have been anything. The defense will question the chain of custody. The defense will demand to know why the site wasn't searched in 2001, why the system waited, why the system failed. The defense will turn the city's anger into doubt, because doubt is the only oxygen they need. And still, the prosecutor's voice tightens when they say, almost under their breath, that even with the defense's arguments, the case has changed. A body identified, documented, linked does what blood alone cannot. It anchors the story. It forces the court to accept the reality of harm, not just disappearance. It narrows the universe of plausible explanations until the defense must build something more elaborate than skepticism. It raises the stakes beyond narrative and into consequence. The detective hears the logic and feels none of the satisfaction. Because logic does not sit with the family, the meeting to notify them is arranged with care. A private room, no cameras, no microphones, no hallway traffic, just a table and chairs and the unbearable weight of words. The family arrives in pieces, faces tense, eyes scanning for clues before anyone speaks. They have learned to read officials the way people learn to read storms. They sit. They wait. The silence stretches. It is the same silence they have lived with for 22 years, but now it feels different, charged, as if the air itself knows what is coming. The detective begins with the truth he can say, not the truth he suspects, not the truth his body already knows, but the truth backed by procedure. He tells them a site connected to the investigation was searched. He tells them items were recovered that are consistent with their loved one's personal effects. He tells them forensic work is underway. He chooses words like stepping stones across a river, careful not to slip into certainty too fast, careful not to take away the last scrap of hope before science makes the final decision. And then he sees it in their faces because families know before you finish the sentence. Hope doesn't vanish with a bang. It collapses with a slow, silent fold, like paper sinking into water. One of them asks again, voice strained but steady, "Is it her?" The detective feels his throat tighten. He feels the room closing in. He feels the weight of 2 decades pressing into a single moment. He says what he must say, what he can say, what no one can prepare for, that identification is being confirmed but that all indications point toward yes. And the family reacts not with one emotion but with many at once, grief detonating and relief bleeding into it in a way that feels wrong and yet inevitable, because certainty, even brutal certainty, ends a particular kind of torture. Someone cries quietly. Someone stares at the wall as if trying to understand how a wall can exist when a life has been absent for so long. Someone asks about the last moments and the detective does what he can, steering away from speculation, away from details not yet proven, away from anything the defense could later twist, because even compassion has to obey the law here, and that is another cruelty that even in grief the system demands caution. He offers them this. The case will not fade again. Not now. Not with what has been found. Not with the arrest already made. Not with Berlin watching. He does not promise them peace. He cannot. He does not promise them the kind of closure movies sell. He promises them only that the truth will be pursued to the end with the strongest tools the present can offer, even if the present is late. When the family leaves, they do not walk like people leaving a meeting. They walk like people carrying a new weight they never wanted, a weight shaped like finality. Outside, Berlin finally receives the official statement, cautious language delivered in controlled tones, but the city hears what it needs to hear between the lines. A long missing person is now believed to have been found. The cold case is no longer simply reopened. It is becoming a murder case in the public imagination, regardless of how carefully officials avoid that word until courts allow it. The reaction is immediate and uneven: grief from strangers, rage from people who never met her but feel betrayed by the idea that someone could vanish in their city and be hidden for decades, fear that turns routine into suspicion, neighbors looking at each other differently, as if the street itself has become untrustworthy. And woven through it all is the shock that the accused, if convicted, lived among them for years, buying groceries, greeting neighbors, moving through the same ordinary spaces as if the past had never happened. The detective watches the coverage again, not because he craves it, but because he needs to anticipate what it will do to the case, how it will shape potential jurors, how it will pressure witnesses, how it will tempt the defense to claim prejudice. The city's hunger is now complicated by grief, and grief makes people demand certainty before certainty is legally deliverable. In the days that follow, the case returns to court with a different gravity. The defense shifts tactics, no longer relying solely on time and doubt, now forced to confront physical reality. They argue the same points: chain of custody, contamination, bias, but they must argue them louder, because the narrative has become harder to loosen. The prosecution introduces new evidence carefully, like placing a heavy object on a table without cracking the wood. Experts testify with measured language, confirming identifications, describing processes, avoiding theatrics. The judge watches the room like a hawk, controlling outbursts, controlling the story's spill into emotion, because emotion can be weaponized by either side. The accused sits through it all with that same controlled posture, but the detective notices new tells, tiny, fleeting, the way his foot taps once when a specific date is mentioned, the way his eyes harden when the storage unit is described, the way his jaw tightens when the victim's name is spoken not as a missing person, but as a person found. Control is still present, but it is no longer effortless. And then comes the moment the city has been waiting for. The moment so many assumed would arrive as a confession, a breakdown, a dramatic collapse. Doesn't. It arrives as something colder and more human. A small shift in strategy. A request for a private conversation through counsel. A willingness to discuss circumstances. Not a full admission. Not a clean surrender. But the unmistakable signal that the walls have finally tightened enough to change the accused's calculus. The detective sits in another room. Not the courtroom. Not the lab. A quieter place where legal representatives hover like shadows. The accused speaks in partial truths in careful language, offering fragments that attempt to control damage rather than reveal soul. He places responsibility everywhere except on his own hands. He implies panic. He implies accident. He implies misunderstanding. He implies a narrative where intention is blurred, where violence is minimized, where accountability becomes negotiable. The detective listens, face still, mind sharp, because this is what some guilty people do when they cannot deny the facts anymore. They negotiate the story. They admit just enough to seem cooperative, just enough to feel like they're controlling the ending. The detective does not let him. The detective does not argue. He asks precise questions. He pins down timelines. He demands locations. He forces detail because details are where stories fall apart and truth stands up. The accused falters more than once, not in dramatic ways, but in the way someone falters when the story they built for themselves begins to collapse under its own contradictions. He grows irritated, then quieter, then defensive, and in one thin moment when his guard slips, he says something that feels like the closest thing to truth he has allowed himself in 22 years, not a confession of murder, not a clear admission, but a sentence that reveals the core of the horror. I thought it would disappear. Not her. Not the truth. The consequences. He thought time would swallow it. He thought Berlin would move on. He thought paper and dust and silence would do what they did for so long: erase. The detective leaves that room with no triumph, only a deep, steady heaviness, because now the case is no longer just about solving a mystery. It is about confronting the reality that the mystery survived because someone relied on the world's forgetfulness, relied on the city's attention span, relied on the gaps between agencies and years in technology, relied on the human tendency to accept uncertainty when certainty is too painful. In the weeks that follow, the legal process grinds forward. The public's hunger turns into weary focus. The family begins the strange process of mourning, a person they have been mourning without permission for decades, arranging things no one wants to arrange, receiving condolences that feel both late and raw. Berlin continues to function because cities always do, but there is a change in the way people talk about it, a caution, a dark humor, a reminder that safety is sometimes only the story we tell ourselves until a story like this breaks through. On the final day, the detective stands outside the courthouse, watching reporters cluster, watching cameras tilt upward, watching the city's attention gather in one place, and he thinks about the beginning again, the wet pavement, the last morning, the absence that became a shadow. He thinks about all the times the family asked where she was and received nothing but silence. He thinks about the storage unit, the rug, the blood, the soil, the slow return of truth. He thinks about how close the case is now to being stamped, labeled, resolved. And he feels the bitter edge of that word. Because resolved does not mean repaired. The verdict, whatever its final legal shape, cannot return 22 years. It cannot erase the empty chair. It cannot undo the nights the family spent imagining possibilities just to survive. It cannot cleanse the city of the realization that someone can live among you and carry a private darkness for decades without anyone seeing it. And that is where the story lands, not with a neat bow, not with a triumphant anthem, but with the lingering echo cold cases always leave behind, the echo that is louder precisely because the answers arrived so late. Berlin found the truth, yes, but Berlin also learned how easily truth can be postponed. As evening falls, the detective walks through the city's streets again, hearing the ordinary sounds, footsteps, trains, distant laughter, and for a moment it all sounds like the beginning, like that morning in 2001 when no one knew what was being written into their lives. He passes a bus stop where posters used to hang, passes a corner where someone once searched the gutter for clues, passes a cafe where someone once waited for a person who never arrived, and he feels the old familiar chill, because even when one cold case ends, it leaves a question behind like a footprint in wet concrete. How many other silences are still out there, waiting for time to betray them? And in that question, Berlin's 22-year mystery finally becomes what it always was, not just a story about one disappearance, not just a headline about a surprise arrest, but a reminder carved into the city's memory, that the past does not stay buried because it is gone, it stays buried because someone somewhere is counting on the world to look away. Not this time. Not again.